it's not about being the authority figure in the room. It's about being a good teacher, a good mentor, a good adult in their life. So nobody likes, I guess, to be put on blast ever. No one likes to be humiliated, called out for behavior, no matter how silly or disruptive it is. It just doesn't feel good to be that one person that's, picked out of the crowd.
No time, no tools, big expectations. How do you transform school culture without derailing the train? Answer: little wins that bring big changes. The flywheel effect. Harnessing the power of momentum to create a school culture that celebrates change and drives itself.
Hello and welcome to the Flywheel Effect, a show dedicated to sharing little wins that can have a big impact on your school culture. I am Jordan Pruitt. I'm here with my co-host, Anna Murphy. We're both former educators now working with the live school team Support Your School's Culture Vision. We're joined today by Katie Neumeier, who is now a customer success specialist for Hagerty. Katie spent the last 9 years in education as a teacher, literacy interventionist, and instructional coach. She holds a bachelor's in elementary education and a master's in literacy. And if you are a frequent visitor to the Live School blog, you might recognize the name because she's wrote some of our most read blog posts. Has wrote a lot about classroom interventions, and we thought we'd have a good little talk about interventions and bring her on today. So, Katie, you want to introduce anything I missed?
No. I think that you covered pretty much all of it. I can go in depth later about different things I did in education if y'all want me to. But yeah, you hit it right on the nail. Nail on the head.
All right. So we always kind of start everybody kind of in the same place because we all have these careers. We go all these different places. You're teaching, you have all these different roles, and now you're outside of education. But what was your very first job in education? Like the first foot in the door, I started here, that they actually paid me, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of grew up, idolizing my teachers. I loved school. I loved reading. And my dad was a teacher too. So he kind of tried to veer me away a little bit from education. But I found my way back. But I did my bachelor's at St. Mary's in San Antonio. And upon finishing my bachelor's, I went straight into my master's program at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. And I started out in the inner city Catholic schools. In the Archdiocese schools. So started out just kind of working within the Catholic schools, working with other educators that were also Catholic. And after 2 years, I then moved into KIPP. So KIPP, Texas, I worked there for 5 years. And that's kind of where I got my foot in the door with literacy. So leadership and literacy roles really grew and developed within all of my different roles at the KIPP, Texas school in Houston.
So help me out. What is KIPP?
So KIPP is a charter network, and it's across the entire United States. I actually worked at their very first elementary school that ever existed for their charter network in Houston. So it was a very well-established elementary school. Started out in 4th grade ELA, and very quickly took on some more leadership roles and literacy roles within that. And then after 3 years, I transitioned into an interventionist role. And then that also kind of blossomed into more of a instructional coaching role. So in my 5 years, I wore lots of different hats and got tons of different experiences, which was awesome.
I was actually going to say it's funny because our CEO at Live School, Matt Rubenstein, he founded Live School when he was working at a KIPP school as well. So he was worked in education in, I think it was KIPP Nashville. But anyway, so a little connection there to KIPP as well.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's where I learned where Live School, all about Live School. That's kind of where I got my start with Live School. And once you kind of had put out some interest for blog writing, it's like, absolutely, I love Live School. I use it all of the time. I can really help kind of translate this into something that teachers can actually use and something that will be helpful.
Yeah. So actually where I'm at in Kentucky, we actually don't have, it's kind of an odd thing. We can have charter schools, but there aren't any. So that's kind of an odd thing. Like they can be here, but there's not one. So thank you for catching me up there. I like hearing about different places and how everybody's set up. Talk to me about the different roles you had. There's one of those that sticks out to me, but I'm curious to hear what was the most challenging of those roles?
Oh man. Well, all of the roles were challenging in their own ways. I think I think one of the most challenging things about I did intervention and instructional coaching simultaneously, which a lot of people don't do because they are two very separate, distinct roles that have tons of responsibilities on both ends. Um, and while I was doing intervention for second, third, and fourth grade, tier two and tier three students, I was also the instructional coach for six teachers, some on the third grade team, some on the fourth, and also part of the Spanish team. So, kind of balancing all of that, we were pushed into the pandemic. So then I was translating and trying to figure out how to take my intervention role, how to take the instructional coaching role, and how to put that into the virtual space. So I would say by far that was the most challenging thing of not only being on the teacher's end, but on the administrator's end and trying to make this work and easy for kids and for all of our teachers. And of course, that was not an easy task, but we made it through.
So you were doing both of those roles remotely during that time. Can you just like a brief summary, like what was your day?
Oh, my day was a long day. So I kind of had to just balance how much I was supporting students, how much I was supporting teachers, a lot of the creation. So I use Nearpod for a lot of my creation for lessons. So a lot of that was done at night and on the weekends. I would actually just go in day to day. I would go to my meetings. I would make sure all my teachers were good. I would teach five, six groups, which means I would jump into Zoom calls and I would then be put in a breakout room, do my lesson, be put back out. And then I would go in and observe teachers in Zoom room spaces, which seems crazy, but it was also really helpful to have another teacher in the room to kind of support the behavior, kind of see what was going on. And KIP, they were ready. They like completely fixed their entire rubric for instructional coaches in the virtual space. So we had an in-person rubric and we had a virtual teacher rubric. So it was pretty interesting because we were still offering coaching and support in that way. So it was a long day. I did tons of work at night, weekends, which is what a lot of teachers have to do to get the job done. But it was worth it. My kids learned a lot and my teachers grew so much. So that's what matters to me.
Well, that sounds like a very busy day. I did a little bit of the observations over Zoom. That was kind of an odd thing, but it was kind of like it was. I don't know. You could zoom in and out. I've not to say zoom too many times, but like it was kind of neat to see how different folks handled it. Like you go to one and like you could tell like they weren't real comfortable with it, and you go to another classroom and they had the same bit of content. And they were showing 8 different kinds of media about it. Like they had all these different things. Like it was a very wide range of like adoption on the things. So that was interesting to me.
I'm curious, Jordan, for you, when the students, because you worked at a high school, when the students saw the dean of students pop into the Zoom classroom, did the cameras go on more? Did they, like, you notice them sit up a little bit more, trying to behave better?
So they were bad. They would send me like a message. Like I would get messages a lot because I was at my school. I wasn't like I didn't start there as the dean. I was a science teacher and a coach. So like I was a science teacher in the freshman academy. So like I knew all the kids, and so like there was a little bit of like, oh, Coach Pruitt's here. Look at that.
That makes sense. That didn't happen in the elementary. We actually had a policy for like cameras on and most of the kids did it. So we really didn't have a problem with that. Sometimes they would leave, like they would chase after an animal or they would get distracted by something, the sun, beaming on the wall. They'd get distracted by things like that, but we could see all of it, which I don't know if that's more or less chaotic.
Maybe more in some cases, but at least somebody's there. That's kind of the struggle. If they don't have the cameras on, they know there's nobody here. So you're just talking to nobody. One of the reasons we wanted to have you on is because you've put out a bunch of good articles on interventions and classroom management strategies and those kind of things. And there's a few that we'll link in the show notes here that are particularly really helpful. The time this is going to post will be late October. for those folks that are in classrooms and who are doing discipline in schools, October can be rough. So can February, Marchish, but October particularly is rough. I thought it would be cool to have you on to kind of give somebody advice, particularly like a classroom teacher they're kind of at the end of the rope at this point. Like they're struggling. Things they've done have not worked. What can they do? How can they reset? How can they do to get a class back on track this time of year?
Yeah, well, that's the $1 million question, right? Like, what can we do when all of these behaviors pop up? And I am not going to, say that I'm an expert by any means in all of this, but I will share like what worked for me in my 9 years in the classroom, because these were struggles that I saw in the first couple of years of teaching, and even all the way up until, when I was teaching in August, September this year, of just certain behaviors that come up a lot and are exhibited by lots of different students, no matter where you are. I'm in Colorado now, at a different charter, or was at a different charter school before I made the transition out. So I think there are three like big things that I learned as a teacher that I think are super helpful. The first one is the ability to be firm and loving at the same time. So firm in the sense of like not nagging or, being the strict teacher, but making sure that kids understand that there is a boundary, there is a line. There are rules, there are expectations, but you're being perceived as that loving adult in their life that's just trying to help kind of navigate them through the school day, right? So them knowing that like you love them and you care, and you can like explicitly say like, I care about you. Like, I really, love you a lot. And this is why I am doing this, or this is why we should behave this way. So walking that line, I think, was the biggest lesson I ever learned of when to be firm, when to be loving. And for my kids to know that like it always came back to the reason why we're doing this is because you're here to learn and you know that I care. And together we can kind of make, a really great year together. The second thing that like I learned as far as behavior goes is consistency. And you'll hear it all of the time. Like consistency is key, consistency is key, but like it's because it literally is the key to like behavior. And I think like whenever I was coaching teachers or going into classrooms, I was looking for how consistently teachers were holding students to expectation. So that could be something as simple as the rule in the classroom is you don't get up when the teacher's teaching. Every single time a student tries to get up, you have to call them on it. You have to have them sit back down. You have to restate that rule. And sticking to your gun, that sounds so regimented and sounds so strict, but it's really not, because you're drawing that boundary deeper and deeper, and you're helping kids understand that that is actually an expectation that is going to be held. So that's, I think, to all teachers that are like getting through the month of October, because October and April are the hardest months of the school year. If you can kind of reel it back in and just go back to like, what is your mission? What are you doing? How can you hold kids explicitly and consistently to like what you want them to do?
So there's a couple things that stand out there to me. The first one was now making them understand that you care, and the reason you're doing this is because you care. There, and I wish I knew where the quote was from, but I've heard like because you mentioned the word love, and I've heard discipline is love. I've heard that before. I don't know where that quote came from. It could have been a president, could have been a football coach. I have no idea, but I kind of I believe that. If the reason if you care about somebody, you should have discipline in your room, because they're not going to learn without it. The same goes for your school. The other piece there about consistency with expectations, holding yourself to that, it keeps you from running into the situation where a student feels singled out. That's when you start to lose people. You start losing credibility when you hold this student to that expectation, but not this one, and they're in the same room, and like it doesn't jive. That's when you really run into problems, when you're not consistent yourself.
And I, like you, worked with elementary students. So when I hear consistency of expectations, if I missed it, my students were surely going to point it out to me that this kid was doing something they weren't supposed to. I didn't work at the high school level like you, Jordan, so I don't know if that's the case there. I assume not. Okay, they still do it. Okay. Because it was immediately, it would be, he's standing up and he's not supposed to. And so that was always a really great reminder to enforce it. But that is one of the reasons why I love elementary students.
No, absolutely. They will remember everything that you say, everything that you do, and they will hold you to it. Flip the script, make sure you're holding kids, accountable, and because they will hold you accountable. And that's kind of the beauty of a classroom too, right? There's like this mutual relationship. Y'all are coexisting in this cool space that you create for kids. And it's not just about you telling them things or teaching them things or whatever. There is this really awesome like relationship that can be built with kids, and behavior is a really big piece of that. And the way that you talk to kids, the way you react with kids, it's a really big piece.
And even on, if you're an administrator, that relationship can still be built through that. I'll give you an example, because you were talking about, Anna, about the elementary kids saying, but they're standing up, that kind of thing. It was not uncommon for me to find a smoker in the bathroom, a vape pen in the bathroom, or like I have to do a search and I'd find something, and I would go about it as respectfully as possible, and like, these are the consequences. This is what it's got to be. It would not be that uncommon for that person, like the next week, like to walk by the bathroom that I hadn't checked and kind of give me a look like, you're going to go in there? Like, you're checking there, right? And, or even kind of subtly come in and tell me I should go check. But there's a relationship there, and it kind of depends on how you dealt with it and those kind of things. So not being overly harsh, but still, holding people to standards and holding people to expectations you got to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also just remembered that I didn't say like the third most important thing I ever learned. Being reflective and like reflecting on you as an educator, what's happening in your classroom. And I think that if I was to sit down with a bunch of educators right now, going into the month of October, November, I would say reflect on what is actually happening in your classroom and where you're trying to take it. Because if you can reflect on you as a teacher, and that might feel good, that might feel bad, and you can reflect on the way that kids are acting or reacting in the classroom, and you can really think about that and kind of bring it back to, a good starting place for you and your kids, especially if things are going wrong, that can really create opportunities for growth as you rethink some of the strategies and rethink some of the procedural things that you're doing in your classroom. So just wanted to make sure I circle back for that.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good point, and we've got more tools for reflection than we've had in the past too. Like, you wouldn't be out of bounds to even film your class and review it. Like, how'd it go? What am I missing? If you're lucky enough to have an instructional coach and you're working with them about this, I've even seen folks who would do like charts, and they would just kind of tally, and they would have all the seats numbered, and like, did you have positive interaction with every kid in the room at least once? Or is this corner over here getting totally neglected? And then till 15 minutes later, when they've been neglected, now they start acting up. Like, those are kind of things you may not know without a little bit of help, or watching, setting your phone up and filming class and seeing, all right, what is actually happening? Is it how I know how I feel about this, but like, what's it actually happening?
No, absolutely. I had at KIPP, I had this phenomenal instructional coach, Jason Swilly. He came in and he said, look, like, I'm going to film you teaching. This is going to be awkward. It's going to feel a little weird, like, to have this camera in the back of the room, but like, it's going to be so awesome when we sit down and talk about strengths, talk about areas of opportunity. And after we started, filming these things and me going back through some of the footage of me teaching, my eyes were open. I was like, whoa, like, I am, only talking to your point. I'm only talking to like 15 of the 30 kids, or I'm, calling out this kid over and over and over again for something that is so minuscule. Like, why do I feel the need to do that? And that helped me become an even stronger teacher and nip some of those little behaviors in the bud, and not give them attention. So I mean, thank you, Jason Swoley, because I don't think I ever would have recorded myself in that kind of manner as a teacher if he had not done that. So,
Well, and I feel like it takes the right kind of leader to do that too, where they themselves have a growth mindset. And I'm sure how he framed it for you was like, we're going to like, it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to help us find ways to improve, like enable you to reflect on what you're doing, which is now like one of your essential practices. But I'm just picturing certain admin from my time that there are ones I would have gone along with it. And there are ones that the thought of watching it back with them would have scared the daylight out of me. So I really do think like the leader too, like approaching it from like an empathetic perspective and understanding, like just how uncomfortable that can be. Like they probably don't want, their staff meetings recorded. You know what I mean? Like I do think like Jason sounds like a wonderful leader to have worked under for that.
no, absolutely. And that even kind of developed later into kind of like a resource building opportunity for us. So we would go into really strong teachers' classrooms and we would record them, having kids come in, having kids line up, like procedural things, or even the way like teachers weaved in questioning strategies into their classrooms. We would record those moments and we created an entire portfolio for teachers to go back and say like, oh, I'm struggling with this. Let me just pull up, I don't know, 20 videos of a teacher doing it. And that also was used as a tool to support teachers instructionally, which was really cool.
That that is awesome. And whenever you can share that for tools with their colleagues, that's helpful too. But it also gives you a chance to celebrate those folks for doing a good job. Like I'm sure there's probably been a time or two at a faculty meeting where you pulled out like something awesome that was happening in classes, and it gave you opportunity to showcase that, which it doesn't happen quite enough because it just kind of sort of the nature of the job. You're in the room and all your colleagues don't see what you're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was really awesome. And it was definitely a highlight, I think, of my career in education, of just being able to be a part of building some of these things into schools that really had meaningful impact, not only on teachers, but on the kids through the teacher.
Yeah, and not that there's like benefits, but one of the things that I guess that would change as far as like comfort level, most of our educators are pretty comfortable being on camera now. They had to do quite a bit of it. I don't know about your school. My school, when we came back, we were in a situation where we had some that were at home and some that were in the room. So like they taught and like had to like live stream what they were teaching at the same time, which is just kind of a wild little period of time in education. But you had to learn so many different skills to do it.
Yeah, it definitely was nice to be back like in a physical classroom after the pandemic, after kind of all that craziness. But yeah, I mean, even in that in between stage, there were still virtual teachers, in-person teachers. There were kind of this distinction between the two when kids were given the choice to either come back to school or stay home. So it was an odd time, and I'm really happy that we can kind of, as a country, put that behind us.
Well, there's a couple strategies specifically I was going to ask you about that are in the piece I'm going to link in the show notes here. It's about strategies to squash disruptive behavior. Two of them I wanted to ask you about. One of them was addressing things one on one, so no blasting. I was going to give you a chance to let folks know what you mean by that, and then following through with logical consequences. I thought those two would be kind of interesting to hear explained out loud.
Yeah. Okay. So one-on-one, not putting kids on blast. This was a hard lesson I had to learn as a young teacher because, I came into the classroom wanting to make sure that kids saw me, this little 21-year-old person, as an authority figure. My fourth graders are pretty much as tall as me. So I was a little bit, coming in my first couple years of teaching, I just wanted to make sure that they knew I was, there for business. And the more time I spent in education, it really kind of veered away from that. It's not about being the authority figure in the room. It's about being a good teacher, a good mentor, a good adult in their life. So nobody likes, I guess, to be put on blast ever. No one likes to be humiliated, called out for behavior, no matter how silly or disruptive it is. It just doesn't feel good to be that one person that's picked out of the crowd. So kids are going to be kids. There is going to be disruptive behavior. No matter what time of year you're in, no matter how well seasoned of a teacher you are, there will be disruptive behaviors. The way that you react to those behaviors, though, is it's imperative. Something that I learned was to have little one-on-one side conversations with kids. So when I saw something going on out of the corner of my eye, I might let that kid do it for 15 seconds. I might let them do it a second time, if they stop. But going over there and saying like, hey, I'm noticing this. This is disruptive because here's what we can do to kind of fix this. And, if that disruption continues, that kind of pivots into more of like that logical consequence conversation that we could have. But, not spending so much time being that person that's just constantly going after kids. It's having those one-on-one respectful conversations with kids that will actually, impact your relationship in a positive way with them moving forward.
So I'm a big proponent of that, and I wanted to add one little piece to that. And some of this might be as kids get older, they might appreciate this more. But I would ask them to step outside into the hallway and just kind of crack the door, and I would start that conversation with, "I asked you to come out here because I didn't want to say this in front of everybody else." And I felt like I got a little bit of rapport like that. Oh, he wasn't trying to embarrass me. Okay. And I think that helps. And like, just be upfront with, what the conversation's about. And then just like you said, redirect the behavior and then go about your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if your kids understand kind of where the conversation is going, a lot of that disruption kind of leaves, right? Like if you give them, one redirect, two redirects, and you've been really mindful about the way that you handle behavior in the classroom. I think kids eventually, no matter what their age is, they kind of, are able to figure it out from there. So a lot of the times, I might redirect a lot in the beginning of the year, but they kind of know that there's a ladder, right? Like I'm going to redirect them maybe only like one more time. And then it kind of goes to the next rung, right? Like, okay, like let's talk, during your lunch period or your specials period about this a little bit more fully, or kind of you wanted me to talk a little bit about logical consequences. There is a whole different variety of consequences that can happen in a school. And I think the word consequences sounds very negative, but if you're able to be logical and mindful about the things that happen when behavior is negative in the classroom, then consequence doesn't have to be this negative thing. It might just be, a logical consequence might just be having a behavior, having a conversation, writing a letter of apology if you hurt someone's feelings, sitting out and having a mediation with a peer that you've had a negative interaction with. Consequences don't have to be like this negative thing. They can actually be turned into a really positive tool in a classroom.
Yeah, and when you can use those, and even like throughout the whole building, anytime you can do that, there's a learning experience there too. Um, it's kind of an easy example because it was very straightforward. Like sometimes you got to be creative with these, but I had a kind of a standing rule: if somebody made a mess in the lunchroom, I would go get them from fourth block, and they would help clean up the lunchroom. And the reason I would do it at that time is because that's when our janitorial staff cleaned up the lunchroom. So if they came back, they also got to see they were leaving this mess for these people. That was the reason we did that. Like it was very straightforward, very logical, like that. But like in other cases, you got to be more creative. But for the most part, if it's kind of a restorative thing, goes hand in hand. If there's a relationship or something's been harmed, how can they make it right? Is there a way they can fix this situation and help them find that solution?
Yeah. And I also think that like with consequences, sometimes there's like this want to jump to this like really big extreme, right? So a kid hits another kid, and all of a sudden, like the principal is being called, you're going in live school, you're putting demerits in. The little sound is coming up on the screen because everyone just saw you put demerits in. And then you're going to say, I'm going to call your mom because this is inappropriate. And it's just this like piling on to this kid for this like one thing when, yeah, is it okay to hit someone? Absolutely not. but there is a better way to handle the situation. There's a better way to handle the conversation. And there's an actually like a great, way to navigate this for that kid to make sure that they understand that their behavior is not okay and how to come back from that. So, that piling on onto kids, I've seen it time and time again. I've done it myself. I'm not here saying like, I've never done this. I definitely like have done this before, which is why like I'm such a big proponent for it now of saying like, there are other ways for you to navigate these conversations.
Well, and I was going to add, like, I've been in that position too, where I've definitely piled on in a moment when there were better ways to approach it that I had learned, since that had occurred. But I also felt like I lost control of the classroom too in that moment. Like, everything became chaos at that point, and I then felt guilty, and trying to come back from that for the rest of the day was such a challenge that I don't know, it because it can come out of a need to like try to like you're trying to control the situation, like you get stressed out and you're like, okay, like we're facing this head on, but it ends up actually just like creating less control, I learned, which was a weird kind of situation to try to navigate and understand that. So anyways, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I was a disciplined guy and I was a football coach, so it may come as like a little bit of surprise. I hardly ever raise my voice, almost ever. Um, I found it like a long time ago. Like it was really hard for me to be like intelligent and logical when if I was yelling. I just didn't work real well. So, and I think that's probably the case for most people if they're honest.
Yeah, I actually got more of a reaction from kids when I fell silent than if I raised my voice. Because again, kind of to Anna's point, adding to the chaos, adding to the frustration or heightened levels of like sensitivity that are happening, especially like in the elementary levels. Kids sometimes when they hear an adult yell or they see someone angry, they automatically are like fight, flight, cry. They have all these, different reactions. So kind of being cool, calm, and collected is probably the best way. Count to 10, take a deep breath. And a lot of the time you get their attention by taking that like moment to recollect. And they're like, whoa, what's happening?
And if you do a good job of building a relationship on the front end, like you talked about how they like there's kind of a ladder to things, that part of that ladder is the kind of the famous teacher look. Like if they get to know you a little bit, they know what where the look is at. They know that look, so they'll respond to it just like silence, and probably more effectively than if you raise your voice. But that's kind of that's been in the teacher toolbox for forever. But that is the reason it works is because that teacher has a relationship with their kids.
Mm-hmm. And have you also heard like there's, the teacher look sometimes is like seen as, there's like a scowl on your face or like your eyebrows are furrowed or something. I also tried to like do a teacher look where it was a smile. So I would have the teacher look of like, oh, like her face like shouldn't look like that, like she's upset. But also I tried very hard to like smile at kids and like, know that like give them the indication that they were doing like such a good job or like I cared about them or loved them. So there can be kind of like a flip side to teacher look, which I like.
So if our Spotify listeners want to see the teacher look that's a smile, they're going to have to go to YouTube to see it. But you can practice it right now if you want.
I mean, I've been smiling this entire time. Y'all are great to talk to. But yeah, I think that if you use both, in a balance, you've got a good handle on your class.
I was going to say, I guarantee people listening right now are making that face. Like that's they know the face. They're practicing it. But I want to be respectful of your time. This has been such a joy getting to connect with you. I mean, we've chatted a bunch with some of the work that we've been able to collaborate on. But where can the listeners find you and follow along with what you're doing now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram. My Instagram's private, so that's probably not a great space. I'm not really out in like the public, except for my dog has his own Insta. That's probably the most public it's gotten on the Insta. Boomer Not Sooner. If you want to follow him, go right ahead.
I plan on following him after this call. I love that.
Yeah, it's Boomer underscore.
Boomer Not Sooner will be in the
not.
notes.
Yeah, with little underscores between the words. Yeah, I mean he's great. Yeah, I'm now at Hegarty, which is a phenomenal place to be. I know, Anna, you and I got to connect about kind of all the cool things I'm getting to do in more of the ed tech space, but still in education, which is what I really wanted to do. And I get to live in this really cool literacy science of reading space now, and talk to districts across the country about, science of reading and why it's important, phonemic awareness. So I mean, Hegarty is it's been a dream and I love working for them. So I'm really excited to kind of see where my journey at Hegarty takes me. I'm so excited to be transitioned out and to be a part of such a phenomenal company. So,
Well, thank you for joining us, Katie. We will have all that in the show notes, particularly your dog's Instagram. It'll be there. Is it boomer_not sooner? That was right?
boomer_not_ sooner. Yeah, I'll send it to you. I'll email it to you. That way you can get it right. Just kidding.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. Have a great night.
Thank you guys so much.
The flywheel effect, harnessing the power of momentum to create a school culture that celebrates change and drives itself.